Before we talk about the possible new Friday the 13th film, I'm going to discuss the previous scrap films that almost happened, because is it foreshadowing? It could be. The creator of Terrifier wants to make a Friday the 13th film, and I've seen this over on Twitter and said, why not talk about it? I know I've seen this before, meaning it now resurfacing with all this new attention could be an indicator that the ball might have started rolling. And I'll be honest from the get-go, I'm not the biggest supporter of this idea. I think Damien is a wonderful, wonderful director, and I can see he truly loves horror, but I don't think anybody, not even him, needs to be thinking about making this film. A lot of people like myself agree that it just feels like it isn't necessary right now. And there's already court cases about the rights to the franchise and the ownership, and then a possible TV show which I think was canned, and I'm also not entirely sure. But the history of this film franchise has so many ideas but never made it past the board meetings. According to bloodydisgusting.com, Damien said, "I've been on record for quite some time now saying if I could ever remake one slasher film, it would be Friday the 13th. And I think there's a way to do that. I mean, my approach would be to keep it in the 80s. Honestly, I would have to make it in the early 80s. I would try and make him as scary as possible because I feel like that's something they kind of lost as the films went along. You just start getting too comfortable with these villains and you need to be scared of them again. I do kind of hate when filmmakers say, especially in the horror scene, I want to make this as scary as possible, or I know how to make this as scary as possible, because sometimes that just never happens. And I'm not saying that nobody ever found Friday the 13th to be scary. Of course they did, but I don't think they would now. I mean, realistically, it's not going to be easy for people who understand all the tropes in horror or horror films pacing. You have to be ingenious with how you write this film, and most times they all play out the same, and I'm being honest saying that it needs to be a lot more than just nostalgic. And it's said a lot in horror, especially in the journalism scene, this is the scariest film of the year, or this is the most sinister film you can't miss. Like, we know you have buzzwords, and I noticed how they used a lot when talking about horror films that are going to be made. And I mean no offense in saying this, but I don't think the Terrifier films are scary. They're just so disturbingly brutal, and I love it for that, but they're not made to be scary films. It's all about pushing the limits. But if I did say at one point in time that Rob Zombie could direct this film, I can't say that Damien Leone couldn't. I just don't think it should happen. What gives me the indication that this will happen is how some years ago, fresh off of Terrifier 2, he said, "Believe it or not, I've gotten to talk to some people who are execs who are in charge of the franchise, and I think I'm still a little too obscure on the Hollywood list of people they would approach to direct that film." And that to me kind of feels like an indication that this will happen because he isn't obscure anymore. I mean, like, Terrifier 3 took the world by storm, it really did. And I do understand his involvement could guarantee brutality for Jason Voorhees, but part of me doesn't think that's enough. Like, did Damien Leone actually prove through his films that outside of the gore and all these mad scenes that he would be a good enough fit for the film? Is that all it's truly about? Just gore? I can focus solely on a statement where we're too comfortable with these characters. I can, because if you can give me a scene that makes people question why the hell it ended up in a Friday the 13th film, I will let you know I was wrong, but I don't think it's going to happen. I feel like every film is different, but they're always just like a newer version of everything else, especially when you have a franchise like this. This franchise does not need a remake, and it's crazy how many people seem to agree. I posted about it on Killer Flicks, and a lot of people seem to agree that it just doesn't need to be remade. I honestly think that the time for remakes should end. It's any bit possible actually he does have a good way of bringing this franchise back to life, and while of course there's a lot of money to be made, I do trust for him it's passion based. But there are 12 Friday the 13th films. If it happens, I hope studios won't just rinse it. I don't have a problem with Damien Leone making this movie. I just feel like it's the corporate side that will continue to push for more when they see how well this would do, and it will do really well. And it's also very likely a sequel to the 2009 reboot never happened because all the rights were in question, you know, like who owned the franchise? Are the original creators going to let a series of sequels happen? Will they ignore the hell they've been through for years just to make some more money? You know, I really think that we've been quite lucky in the last few years with some of the films we've seen, because there's been plenty of original films released, and I do believe Halloween proved you can't satisfy anybody with franchises like this. Halloween was concluded in a really unique way, by the way, and everybody hated it. Well, not everybody, but those who didn't like it overshadowed those who really did like it. But we're going to discuss some of the films that we haven't gotten our eyes on but were planned for a release in the past. In 2013, it was reported that a new Friday the 13th film was in development, originally suspected as a sequel to the 2009 film, but then it was reported to be a new reboot entirely, meant to release in 2017 on October 13th, but that was actually pushed back as it was really meant to release in 2015, and this is everything I know about that scrapped film. New Line reportedly had given the rights back to Paramount Pictures, with word the studio wanted to bring the franchise back to life. Producer Brad Fuller confirmed the last script involved Camp Crystal Lake reopening to the public and would show Jason in some sort of snow setting of a portion of the film, something like we would have seen with the Wrong Turn film. Despite interest from from the producers to pursue a sequel for the 2009 entry. It seemed that it hadn't been enough for the project to move forward, as Platinum Dune's Brad Fuller was quoted saying it's dead and it is not happening. Jason would also be rumoured to return in 3D, whatever that means, and it's said that this sequel would not take any cues from any previous Friday the 13th sequels and would offer a completely new storyline. It was previously said that the film would incorporate found footage and answer the decades-old question of why slasher Jason Voorhees can't be killed. Apparently the found footage aspect had been dropped, which is a shame because that sounds fantastic, and I would love to see that if we ever did get a new film in our future. I personally believe Friday the 13th 2009 was a genius attempt at mixing the past films into some sort of new modern idea, and while it's loved by so many, it was never actually enough to constitute a sequel. And on top of the film we just discussed, there are many other failed plans at bringing this franchise back, whether it's solely down to the issue of who owns the rights or that nobody who had fit right had their chance of offering their best shot. We just never got any of these films, and we have to look at the reception of other franchises braved long-awaited returns and understand that this idea generally is a damned if you do and damned if you don't scenario. We have films like Terrifier that are creeping toward similar status, much like these classics, and it does beg the question if there is any reason at all to even go back to the past and try and make these live once again. I don't know if anyone knows what's best because it feels like a really hard question to answer. While being the second highest grossing film of the franchise, the reboot actually didn't have the best audience reception, but I do believe this is due to it being a reboot in nature. It's always finicky when it comes to acclaim on reboots. If we do get a new film, I would love to see found footage be incorporated somewhere, perhaps the opener to the film. I think that would be great, but if they can't figure out the TV show, how on earth would they figure out a new movie and possible sequels, because how many storylines can actually overlap, because it would be two. I don't know how much faith I have in Leone as a writer, and I understand his ability to direct is fantastic, but I don't know about the writing side of it. Not that Friday the 13th films have been known for their glorious storylines, but maybe I'd be more optimistic if they hired somebody else to write the film. And I hate saying that because I feel like it's really rude, and I have a lot of respect for this guy, this director, but I think he wouldn't really be the best fit as a writer, and I'm only being honest in saying it. I have no control over this film being made, and I likely would be in the audience if it ever happened, but mainly because I've never seen a Friday the 13th film in the cinema, which alone is a terrible reason to go and see a film. What are your thoughts? Are you excited? It seems very possible this film might actually be made with or without Damien Leone. So are we to accept that the owners won't let the franchise end? Let me know below. I think it's a delicate situation and we just have to see where it ends up, I think.